The Bitterroot Valley stretched beneath a dying winter sun as Silas Cade rode his horse along the frozen trail. Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the western sky, their peaks already swallowed by approaching darkness. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since noon, and now the cold bit through his leather coat like a hungry animal searching for warmth. His Colt Peacemaker hung heavy against his right thigh. 6 rounds waited in the cylinder, patient as sleeping wolves. He had not fired that weapon at another man since leaving Kansas, since watching his brother bleed out on a saloon floor while the man who killed him walked free. That memory still burned like a brand pressed against his skull. Some wounds never heal. They just stop bleeding long enough for a man to pretend he's whole again. Silas kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. His cabin waited 3 miles north, promising warmth and solitude. Those were the only things he wanted anymore. No conversations, no connections, no reasons for anyone to remember his face or whisper his name in crowded rooms. Then something at the edge of his vision made him pull the reins. The widow's cabin sat near the valley's eastern boundary, a small structure built from pine logs and stubborn determination. Smoke should have been rising from its stone chimney. Every cabin in Montana territory showed smoke this time of year. Fire meant life. Fire meant survival. But the widow's chimney stood cold and empty against the darkening sky. Silas stared at that silent cabin while his horse stamped impatiently beneath him. His gut tightened with a familiar dread. In weather like this, no smoke meant only 2 possibilities. Either the cabin stood abandoned, or someone inside had stopped being able to feed the flames. Nia Blackwood lived alone out there. The Apache widow, folks called her, though she was only half Apache by blood. Her husband Thomas had been gunned down 14 months ago in what the sheriff called a fair duel. Nobody who witnessed it believed that lie, but nobody possessed the courage to say otherwise. Since Thomas died, Nia had become a ghost haunting her own property. The townspeople avoided her like plague carriers, partly because of her mixed heritage, mostly because they feared the men who had put her husband in the ground. Silas understood isolation. He had wrapped himself in it like armor since fleeing Kansas. But watching an empty chimney in the dead of winter went against every instinct that had kept him alive through cavalry winters and border skirmishes. He turned his horse toward the widow's cabin. The closer he rode, the worse the feeling in his chest became. No lantern glow flickered behind the frosted windows. No sound of movement drifted across the frozen air. The cabin sat dark and silent as a fresh grave. He dismounted at the fence post and looped his reins around weathered wood. The porch boards groaned beneath his boots as he approached the door. He knocked once with a gloved fist. The sound echoed across the empty yard and faded into nothing. No answer came. Silas pushed the door open slowly, keeping his right hand near the Colt. Darkness greeted him, thick and cold. The temperature inside felt worse than the air outside. That meant the fire had been dead for hours. Gray ash filled the stone hearth where flames should have danced. The cabin smelled of cold wood and something else. Something that reminded him of winter battlefields where wounded men froze before help could reach them. Then he saw her. Nia lay curled on a narrow bed against the back wall, buried beneath a thin blanket that offered no real protection. Her clothes were soaked through with melted snow and ice water. Her skin had turned the blue-gray color that preceded death, and her lips were purple as bruised plums. Hypothermia, the silent killer that crept through wet fabric and stolen heat until the heart simply forgot how to beat. Silas crossed the room in 3 long strides. His hand touched her shoulder and found flesh cold as riverstone in January. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Each exhale a small surrender to the cold that was claiming her inch by inch. He had seen this before. During his cavalry years, men caught in blizzards turned up hours later with frost coating their eyelashes and ice forming in their lungs. Most of them never woke up. The lucky ones died fast. The unlucky ones lingered long enough to know what was happening. Every second mattered now. Wet clothing pulls heat from the body faster than cold air alone. That knowledge, drilled into him during years of frontier survival, drove his hands to move with clinical precision. He removed her frozen shoes first. They came away heavy with ice water, then her soaked coat and shirt. Nothing existed in that moment except the desperate arithmetic of survival. Body heat escaping, core temperature falling. Minutes remaining before her organs began shutting down one by one. Dry clothes emerged from a wooden trunk at the foot of her bed. He dressed her with careful efficiency, handling her like something precious and fragile. 3 wool blankets followed, wrapped tight around her body to trap whatever warmth still flickered inside. Then he built a fire. His hands moved from memory. Tinder first, dry grass and wood shavings from his coat pocket. Then kindling arranged in a careful pyramid. Then larger pieces of split pine. The flint sparked once, twice, 3 times before the first small flame caught hold and began to grow. As firelight spread across the room, Silas noticed something that turned his blood to ice water. A dark bruise covered her left cheekbone, fresh, purple-black against her tan skin. Her lower lip was split and crusted with dried blood. A second bruise marked her jaw near the ear. These were not injuries from falling in the snow. Someone had beaten this woman. Someone had left her to die in that storm. Anger flared in his chest, hot and sudden. He forced it down. Emotion would not help her survive the next few hours. Only action mattered now. Silas pulled a wooden chair close to her bedside and settled in for a long night. He fed her small sips of warm water whenever consciousness flickered behind her eyelids. He kept the fire burning strong, adding logs every hour, watching shadows dance across the walls like restless spirits. He counted her breaths the way he had once counted heartbeats while holding his dying brother in that Abilene saloon. 43 breaths per minute at first, too fast. Her body fighting desperately against the cold. Then 40, then 35, slowly returning to normal as warmth crept back into her bones. The night stretched endless and dark. Wind howled against the cabin walls like something hungry trying to claw its way inside. Silas did not sleep. He sat in that chair with his eyes fixed on her face, willing her to keep breathing, refusing to let death claim another person while he watched helplessly. Dawn arrived as pale light creeping through frost-covered windows. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Silas added fresh wood and watched the flames climb again. Naya's eyes opened, brown, deep and dark as mountain earth after spring rain. Confusion filled them at first, followed by slow recognition as her mind assembled fragments of memory into something coherent. She tried to speak. Her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper scraping against a raw throat. "Who are you?" "Silas Cade, your neighbor from the north end of the valley." Her gaze dropped to the dry clothes covering her body, then lifted to meet his eyes. No shame colored her expression, no accusation, only the quiet understanding of someone who had survived worse than helplessness. "You stayed through the night," he answered with a single nod. "Thank you." Silas did not acknowledge her gratitude. Instead, he asked the question that had burned through his mind during those long, dark hours. "Who did this to you?" Naya closed her eyes. When they opened again, something harder than fear had replaced the confusion, something that looked like cold, patient rage. "The men who want this land," she said. "They will come back." Silas rose from his chair and walked to the window. Snow blanketed the valley in pristine white, beautiful and treacherous, hiding whatever darkness moved beneath its surface. Somewhere out there, men who beat women and left them to freeze were planning their next visit. Somewhere out there, evil wore expensive coats and carried legal documents demanding signatures at gunpoint. His fingers brushed the worn grip of his Colt. 6 rounds, waiting. He had spent years running from violence. Perhaps the time had come to stop. 3 days passed while Silas remained at the widow's cabin. He fell into routines that felt strangely natural despite the circumstances. Each morning he broke ice from the water trough so her 3 surviving goats could drink. Poor creatures, thin enough to count their ribs through matted fur. One limped badly from an old injury that had never healed right. The fence surrounding her property had been torn down deliberately, not storm damage. Human hands had ripped those posts from the frozen ground with malicious intent. He repaired it anyway, driving new stakes into earth that resisted every blow of his hammer. He chopped wood until his shoulders burned, hauled water from the creek through knee-deep snow, kept the fire burning day and night until warmth finally settled into the cabin like a welcome guest. Naya recovered faster than he expected. Stubborn strength lived in her bones. By the second day, she insisted on standing, despite his warnings. By the third, she moved through the cabin with careful determination, refusing to surrender tasks she considered her own responsibility. Silas found himself respecting that quiet resilience more than he wanted to admit. On the third evening, they sat across from each other while firelight painted the walls in shades of amber and gold. Outside, wind screamed against the cabin like a wounded animal. "You have no obligation to stay," Naya said quietly. "I know." "Then why remain?" Silas watched flames consume the logs he had split that afternoon. Truth pressed against his chest like a stone. "Because I have watched too many people die alone." She studied him with those dark eyes that seemed to see past the surface of things. Questions lived in her gaze, but she held them back, not yet ready to ask, not yet certain she wanted answers. Instead, she told him about Thomas. Her husband had worked as a blacksmith in the nearby town. Strong hands that shaped metal into useful things. Kind heart that never turned away anyone needing help. They bought this land together, built this cabin with their own sweat, raised these goats from kids barely bigger than barn cats. Life was hard but honest. Every sunrise felt like a gift earned through work and sacrifice. Then the railroad came looking for a route through the valley. Northern Pacific sent a man named Cyrus Harlan to acquire the necessary land. He carried contracts in one hand and threats in the other. Most property owners signed away their claims because the money seemed generous or because the alternative seemed worse. Thomas refused to sell. 2 weeks after his refusal, Eli Harlan appeared at the town saloon. Cyrus's younger brother, 26 years old, cold gray eyes and hands that moved like striking snakes. Folks whispered he was the fastest gun in Montana territory, though nobody wanted to test that claim firsthand. Eli accused Thomas of stealing one of his horses, a lie so transparent that everyone in the saloon recognized it immediately. Thomas Blackwood had never stolen anything in his life. He shaped metal for honest wages. He did not take what belonged to others. The accusation did not matter. Eli wanted a duel. Thomas owned a pistol for dealing with snakes and wolves. He had never pointed it at another human being. When he reached for that weapon in the saloon, his hand moved with the hesitation of a man who still believed in mercy and fair play. Eli's bullet found his heart before Thomas's fingers touched the grip. Naya's voice remained flat as she finished the story. No tears dampened her cheeks. She had cried oceans during the 14 months since that night. Now only dry rage remained, hard and cold as winter stone. "Everyone knows Eli murdered him," she said. "No one will testify against the Harlans. Cyrus controls too many people in this valley." Silas listened without interruption. When silence reclaimed the room, he spoke. "I recognize that trick." Naya waited. The story of Abilene had never passed his lips since the night it happened. Some wounds heal better when left unexposed. Some secrets grow roots so deep that pulling them out threatens to destroy everything built above. But sitting here with this woman who had lost everything the same way he had, the words found their own path to freedom. Danny Cade was 19 when he died. Silas, his younger brother. Quick smile and quicker mind. Future bright as polished silver. He worked their family farm in Kansas while Silas rode with the cavalry, sending letters filled with plans and dreams that would never come true. A wealthy rancher decided he wanted that farm, wanted the water rights, wanted the grazing land, wanted everything the Cade family had built through generations of honest labor. One night in Abilene, Danny sat in a saloon drinking coffee and waiting to buy tobacco for their father's pipe. He did not play cards, did not drink whiskey, just wanted tobacco and a few minutes away from farm chores. A hired gun accused him of cheating at a poker game he was not playing. When Danny denied the accusation, the gunman demanded satisfaction, called him a liar and coward in front of the crowded room. Danny drew his pistol because pride demanded response, because walking away felt like surrender, because he did not understand that some men made their living ending lives. Silas arrived 5 minutes too late. He found his brother bleeding out on the sawdust floor, eyes already glazing over, hands still reaching for a weapon that had done him no good. He held Danny while the light faded, felt the last breath leave his body, watched death steal someone he had sworn to protect. 1 week later, Silas found the hired gun outside a brothel at the edge of town. No challenge, no warning, just 3 bullets placed center mass before the man could reach for his weapon. Then he rode to the wealthy rancher's property under cover of darkness, burned the stables, burned the barn, burned everything that would catch flame. Then he ran. Wanted posters followed him across state lines. Murder and arson. $500 for Silas Cade. Dead or alive, he had been running ever since. "I do not regret killing that man," Silas said, meeting Naya's eyes across the firelight. "But I regret running afterward. Should have stayed and fought for the farm, fought for what belonged to us." He leaned forward in his chair. "This time, I intend to stay." She held his gaze without flinching. "They will try to kill you. Perhaps they will succeed, but I promise this: they will pay a heavy price for trying." On the 5th morning, the sound of approaching horses shattered the valley's silence. 6 riders emerged from the southern trail, moving with the confidence of men who expected no resistance. Silas stepped onto the cabin porch, positioning his hand near the colt without making the gesture obvious. Cyrus Harlan rode at the front of the formation, black horse beneath him. Expensive leather coat, silver-plated Smith & Wesson Schofield gleaming at his hip. 45 years of cruelty had carved deep lines into his face, and his eyes held the flat calculation of a rattlesnake measuring distance. 5 gunmen spread behind him, hard faces, empty stares, professional killers who worked for wages and slept soundly after earning them. Cyrus stopped his horse at the gate, but made no move to dismount. Looking down from the saddle was part of the intimidation. "Silas Cade," the name dripped from his lips like venom. "Figured you were rotting in some unmarked grave by now." "Harlan." A thin smile crossed the older man's weathered face. "Still have your wanted poster hanging in my office back in town. Kansas wants you badly. Murder and arson. $500 reward." He tilted his head with mock sympathy. "1 telegram to the territorial marshal, and you will decorate a gallows before spring thaw." Silas remained motionless. "State your business." "Came to check on the widow." Cyrus peered toward the cabin. "Where is she hiding?" The door creaked open. Naya stepped out carrying her Winchester rifle with the ease of someone who had handled weapons since childhood. She did not aim at anyone directly, but her stance made clear she knew exactly how to use it. Cyrus's eyes narrowed. "You look healthier than expected. Heard you met with some trouble during that blizzard." "Not trouble." Naya's voice cut the cold air like a blade. "Your men beat me and left me in the snow to die." Cyrus raised both hands in theatrical innocence. "I possess no knowledge of such events." He produced a folded document from inside his coat. But I came bearing generous terms. $300 for this property, double actual market value, sign the papers, relocate elsewhere, start fresh. Naya did not glance at the document. This land belongs to me, legal and proper. The law recognizes my claim. Cyrus laughed. The sound held no warmth. Law? He gestured at the armed men behind him. Out here, guns make the law. Money makes the law. Nothing else matters. Silas stepped forward. She gave her answer. You heard it clearly. The amusement drained from Cyrus's face. You are building your own coffin, Cade. A wanted fugitive protecting an Apache widow. Who will believe your story when bodies start appearing? He gathered his reins. 72 hours, 3 days to reconsider. After that deadline passes, negotiations end permanently. Before riding away, he added one final piece of information. My brother Eli learned you were here. He finds himself curious about your reputation. Stories claim you were fast during your cavalry days. Cyrus smiled with genuine anticipation. Eli wants to discover if those stories hold any truth. The riders vanished down the trail, leaving hoof prints and settling dust. That night, Silas saddled his horse and rode into town beneath cold stars. The saloon contained the usual assortment of miners, drifters, and broken men seeking warmth at the bottom of whiskey glasses. Silas found his target in a shadowed corner booth. Jedediah Marsh, an old prospector who had wandered these mountains for 3 decades, collecting secrets the way others collected dust. After several drinks loosened his tongue, the old man talked. Cyrus Harlan answers to masters larger than any railroad, Jedediah said, voice barely above a whisper. Copper veins run beneath this entire valley, rich deposits worth a fortune. Nobody has mined them because extraction requires capital beyond what locals can gather. But once railroad tracks reach this territory, mining companies will follow with their equipment and their money. And Cyrus has been quietly purchasing mineral rights attached to every parcel he acquires. The pieces clicked together in Silas's mind like tumblers falling into place inside a lock. This situation had never been about railroad routes. This was about millions of dollars worth of copper ore buried beneath their feet. What about Thomas Blackwood? Jedediah shook his head sadly. Everyone knows Eli pulled that trigger. Nobody will swear to it in any courtroom. Cyrus has bought too many consciences around here. Silas left coins on the table and stood. What do you intend to do, Cade? What I should have done years ago. He rode back toward the cabin as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and fire. Naya stood waiting on the porch, Winchester cradled in her arms, dark circles under her eyes from a sleepless night. He told her everything. The copper, the mineral rights, the fortune Cyrus was building through murder and manipulation. Your husband did not die over a piece of land, Silas said. He died because millions in copper ore lay beneath this ground. Fire ignited in Naya's eyes, not grief, something far more dangerous. What do we do now? Silas looked toward the mountains where morning light burned away the darkness. We have 72 hours before they return, and this time, running is not something I plan to do. 2 days remain to prepare. Silas worked from first light until exhaustion nearly dropped him. He dug a shallow trench behind the cabin, deep enough for a person to lie prone and fire without exposing themselves to return shots. Sandbags reinforced positions beneath both main windows. Heavy timber braced the gate against charging horses. Naya labored beside him without complaint. She cleaned her weapons with practiced hands. The Winchester lever action could deliver 15 rounds as fast as she could work the mechanism. Her husband's Remington revolver waited as backup. She boiled water, prepared bandages, gathered supplies for treating whatever wounds might come. What distance can you shoot accurately? Silas asked while they worked. My father scouted for General Crook during the Apache campaigns, Naya replied. He placed a rifle in my hands before teaching me to read. 200 yards against moving targets. Silas nodded with genuine respect. An ally, not a liability. The night before the deadline, he rode into town one final time. 3 farmers occupied a corner table at the saloon. Willard Pruitt, Amos Tanner, Henderson Cole. Each had signed over their land to Harlan under pressure and threats. Now they worked as hired hands on property their families had cleared and cultivated for generations. Silas approached their table. "Harlan cheated every one of you," he said quietly. "The land you sold contains copper worth more than you will earn in 10 lifetimes." He knew about the deposits. He kept that knowledge hidden while offering you pennies for buried treasure. The 3 men exchanged glances heavy with suppressed anger. Tomorrow morning, the Blackwood cabin, Harlan brings 8 guns to finish what his brother started. Silas met each man's eyes in turn. "If you want this valley to hold any space for honest men, you know where to stand." He left without waiting for answers. Dawn arrived on the 8th day with crystalline clarity. No cloud softened the pale sky. No wind disturbed the perfect stillness. Silas stood alone before the reinforced gate. The peacemaker waited in his holster. Behind him, Naya held position inside the cabin, Winchester aimed through the sandbagged window. They came at noon, 8 riders this time. Cyrus centered the formation like a general surveying conquered territory. Eli rode at his brother's right hand, young and hungry, eager for the reputation another killing would bring. 6 professional gunmen completed the group. Cold eyes, steady hands, men who followed money the way wolves follow blood. Eli dismounted first. He walked with the lazy confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. 26 years old, sharp features, gray eyes empty of everything except predatory calculation. His Colt Lightning rode low on his right thigh in the position favored by professionals. He stopped 10 paces from Silas. Silas Cade, the name carried across the silent valley. "They say you were fast once. Quick draw artist. Deadly aim." Silas offered no response. Eli's lips twisted into something between smile and sneer. "They also say you killed that man in Abilene by shooting him unaware." "No honor in that." He spread his hands. "Today you get a chance to prove you are not a coward. Draw, or die whimpering like a kicked dog." Silas studied the young man before him. This was the face that haunted Naya's nightmares. The hand that had stolen Thomas Blackwood from the world. "You killed Thomas using that same trick," Silas said. "Challenged a blacksmith who had never pointed a weapon at another human being." Irritation flickered across Eli's face. He carried a gun. He could have drawn faster. "He never had a chance." Silas let the words hang in the frozen air. "And neither do you." Eli's hand moved. Fast. Impossibly fast. The Colt Lightning leaped from leather, rising towards Silas's chest, hammer cocking in one fluid motion. But Silas was faster. The peacemaker cleared its holster before thought could interfere. Muscle memory forged through thousands of hours took command. Aim. Fire. Thunder split the morning silence. Eli Harlan toppled backward with a dark hole centered between his eyes. His weapon discharged into the frozen ground as dead fingers spasmed. Silence stretched for one eternal heartbeat. Then Cyrus screamed, "Kill him!" 7 guns cleared leather simultaneously. Silas dove left, rolling behind the water trough as bullets tore splinters from the wood. He fired twice. One gunman pitched off his horse. Another grabbed his shoulder and howled. The Winchester roared from inside the cabin. 3 shots in rapid succession. One rider crumpled. Another's horse reared wildly, throwing him into the dirt. Lead filled the air. Wood exploded. Glass shattered. Then new gunfire erupted from the eastern ridge. 3 figures appeared on the hillside. Willard Pruitt, Amos Tanner, Henderson Cole, rifles raised and firing. They offered no warnings. They simply added their weapons to the fight. The battle lasted less than 2 minutes. When smoke cleared, 5 of Harlan's men lay motionless in blood-stained snow. Two survivors fled south on panicked horses. Cyrus himself sprawled on frozen ground, wounded in shoulder and thigh. Silas approached with the peacemaker leveled at the fallen man's head. "You killed my brother!" Cyrus snarled through clenched teeth. "Your brother murdered innocent men for profit." No emotion colored Silas's voice. "And you will answer for Thomas Blackwood's death." Willard Pruitt walked over, rifle in hand. "I am justice of the peace for this settlement, Harlan. Just witness clear self-defense." Grim satisfaction filled his words. "You traveled to Fort Shaw in chains. Murder charges, conspiracy, whatever else prosecutors can prove." They bound the wounded man and loaded him across a horse. Two farmers volunteered to escort him toward the fort. Silence reclaimed the valley. 1 week later, spring whispered its first promises across the mountain slopes. Cyrus Harlan occupied a cell at Fort Shaw, awaiting trial. Northern Pacific withdrew from the valley. Too much blood, too many complications. The copper remained beneath the earth, waiting. Snow retreated from fence lines. Brown earth emerged from winter blankets. Air carried warmth it had forgotten during frozen months. Silas stood before the cabin, repairing bullet damage to the gate. Scars in the wood would weather into permanent reminders of what had happened here. Naya emerged carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and stood beside him, looking across the valley that had nearly claimed both their lives. She walked to the small hill behind the cabin, where a wooden cross marked Thomas's grave beneath a cedar tree. Her hand rested on cold earth for a long moment. Her lips moved in words too quiet to hear. When she returned, her shoulders stood straighter than they had since the night Silas found her dying. "Where will you travel from here?" she asked. Silas drank his coffee. "Thought about all the miles since Abilene, all the nights sleeping with one eye open, all the mornings wondering if today someone would recognize the face on a faded wanted poster." "I have been running long enough," he said finally. "Time to stop." Naya nodded. "This land needs working. Spring brings plowing and planting. More labor than one person can manage." He looked at the strength in her eyes, the fire that never died, even when they left her freezing in a blizzard. "Your husband built something worth protecting here. Letting it fall apart seems wrong." She met his gaze. "Then stay." Not a question. A simple statement. Offered and accepted. Silas turned back to the gate and lifted his hammer. Naya walked inside to begin preparing the noon meal. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady and warm, a signal visible across the valley that someone lived here. Someone who intended to remain. The cabin that nearly became a tomb was becoming something else entirely. A home. For the first time since his brother's blood stained his hands, Silas Cade had found a place worth defending. He was done running. But at Fort Shaw, in a cold cell smelling of despair, Cyrus Harlan received a visitor. The man wore an expensive black vest, gold watch chain, manicured hands. He represented mining interests from San Francisco who had heard rumors about copper deposits in a remote Montana valley. "We can secure your release," the visitor said quietly. "In exchange, you provide complete information about the Bitterroot Valley, every detail." Cyrus looked up from his cot. Hatred still burned in his eyes. "The man who killed my brother lives on that land. Perhaps our arrangement can address multiple concerns." For the first time since his capture, Cyrus Harlan smiled. The story was far from finished.